So it's not surprising that ESPN or any like sports news outlet can go a day without talking about racism. That's like what sports is now. Is at least sports like media is just racism and social issues, and it's really annoying simply because the point of sports, well, not like the actual point. The point of it is to win and compete, but at least the point from a viewer perspective is to escape everything from real life. Responsibilities, politics, like just world events. Just kind of escape for a couple hours and enjoy like athletes doing what they do. And at least since like 2020, before that, but primarily since then, it's been diluted with politics and social issues and stuff like that. Like back in 2020, when all of the BLM protests and riots were going on, like these guys were like boycotting games or whatnot, which I mean, you do what you want, you stick up for what you want, it is what it is. But still, it's like, the game is being lost. Any game, basketball, football, hockey, because it's all just like now a platform for social issues, right? And I'm not trying to make the claim like athletes should just like shut up and dribble, so to speak. That was a big talking point a few years ago where athletes felt like news reporters were basically telling them to do that. No, there's nothing wrong with being vocal about social issues, but you guys have social media and you have podcasts and you can go on shows and voice your opinions on, X amount of topics without taking away from the game, because you still get paid a lot of money. You get paid millions of dollars to play a game. So to not show up for it, a lot of the times it seems like a slap in the face to people who like have to go to like quote unquote normal jobs and work very, very hard for their wage, right? These athletes, although they work hard, I mean, you can, especially if you're like the, cream of the crop in terms of athletes, you can take games off if you want. There's now load management where, players are playing one game, then missing the next 4 to rest. Like, I mean, there's so many privileges to being at that level. So to not be able to show up and compete, especially for people who come out to see you, they spend their money to come see you and you decide not to play because there are social issues. Well, that's a problem. And then it bleeds over into the media where I'll turn on First Take and I gotta check the guide to make sure it's not CNN, right? They're talking about social issues all the time, and it's no different, right? It's no different than what you're about to witness right now. Right. And this one was weird because like it didn't even have any correlation to like a social issue, in my opinion. Right. It was just a normal basketball conversation and somehow race got lumped into it. So I'm pretty sure everybody knows who these guys are. I'm a sports guy, so I kind of know them like the back of my hand, at least from what I see on TV. But just in case, this is First Take. It's a show on ESPN, a sports show on ESPN. You have Stephen A. Smith, who's basically the head of the show. And then you got Kendrick Perkins, a retired player who is now an NBA analyst. And Kendrick Perkins, he's very passionate, and I appreciate that, but he's not super analytical, right? He gets really emotional and animated whenever he's talking about something. And that was on full display here. So it's NBA season, and the season is actually coming closer to an end. I think there's only like maybe, 15 to 20 games left for each team. So soon they're going to have to start voting for MVP, most valuable player, who was the best player in the NBA for X amount of reasons. And over the past 2 years, a guy by the name of Nikola Jokić has won the MVP. Now, I'm going to tell you something about him, even though it shouldn't matter, right? It should not matter. What should matter is that he's an amazing player and he's a center. So he's tall and kind of slow and he's dominating, right? He should be getting circles ran around him and he's cooking. So that should be the only thing that matters, but clearly it's not. I'm going to tell you something about him before Kendrick Perkins beats me to it. Is Nikola Jokić is white, right? So even before I even say anything, I feel like you already know where it's going. Nikola Jokić has won the MVP award for the past 2 years in a row, and he's on pace to win it for a third time, right? So 3 years in a row he's on pace to win, and he's white. That's what we know so far. So they're discussing it, and a runner-up to the MVP award is Joel Embiid. He's also a center, but he's black. And Kendrick Perkins thinks that should be the MVP, which whoever it went to, it would be fine. They're both fantastic players. They're playing out of their mind. But Kendrick Perkins, he is a points guy, right? If somebody is averaging 30 points a game, he thinks that that person should be MVP over a guy who's averaging 20 points, 15 rebounds, and 10 assists, right? So he takes that into this conversation. And the clip that I'm about to play, it didn't get as much traction as the one I'm going to play in a second, but it sets up for what was told to him following these comments. So this first one is just what Kendrick Perkins said about like MVPs over the past, I don't know, a few decades, since like the 1990s, and what they all have in common. So enjoy.
When I look at JJ and I hear him talk, because he's so big in analytics and he's a historian when it comes down to diving in deep and going back into history and talking about the evolution of the game, why didn't he never bring up this in particular subject? When it comes down to guys winning MVP since 1990, it's only 3 guys that won the MVP that wasn't top 10 in scoring. Do you know who those 3 guys were?
Who were they?
Steve Nash, Jokić, and Dirk Nowitzki. Now, what do those guys have in common? I'll let it sit there and marinate. You think about it.
3 guys since 1990, according to Kendrick Perkins, have won the MVP without being top 10 in scoring. Steve Nash, Dirk Nowitzki, and Jokić. And he goes on to say, what do all these guys have in common? Now, what I'll tell you is that it has nothing to do with their position or their team. Steve Nash was a point guard, Dirk Nowitzki was a power forward, and Jokić is a center. They were all on different teams. Well, Steve Nash and Dirk played together, but they played at different teams when they won their respective MVPs. Steve Nash played for the Suns, Dirk played for the Mavericks, and Jokić plays for the Nuggets. So they don't have any of those things in common. Now, let's just revisit the point that I made earlier. Nikola Jokić is white. Dirk Nowitzki is white. Steve Nash is white. Every single time. Every single time that anything happens in the world, we got to sit and scour everything to try to find some correlation between it and race or racism. And I mean, like I said, sometimes I want to get pissed, but I'm more impressed, right? Simply because of what I'm about to say in a second. But just keep this in mind, is that he is insinuating that since 1990, there have been 3 MVPs who have won the award without being top 10 in scoring, and they've all been white. Now, this is what J.J. Redick had to say. J.J. Redick is another retired player who has turned analyst, but he is very analytical. And he went in on Kendrick Perkins. This is what he had to say in response to that.
What we've just witnessed is the problem with this show, where we create narratives that do not exist in reality. The implication, what you are implying, that the white voters that vote on NBA are racist, that they favor white people. You just said that. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. That is exactly what you implied, Kendrick Perkins. That is exactly what you implied. Secondly, hold on.
I did not call. I stated the facts. And you're not about to sit up.
We all know what you implied the other day. We all know what you implied just now. Hold on.
I stated
one at a time.
It's the facts.
One at a time.
It's the facts. It's the facts.
Okay.
So initially, that's not what he said. But then as soon as J.J. Redick starts to press, well, now, you know, that's what he stated because it's the facts. And then whenever you're losing an argument, you start to scream and shout because, you know, that drives your point home even more. Complete nonsense, right? But J.J. Redick then went on to, like, just give him a bunch of, like, stats, right, about the efficiency of Steve Nash, Dirk, and Jokić in the years that they won MVP. Yeah, they might not be top 10 in scoring, but it ain't like they averaged 5 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists and won an MVP award. No, they were efficient, and they played on the best teams in the league at that time, right? So he went in on them. And there was one thing he left out, which I'm kind of glad he did, because it gave me an opportunity to, like, look into it to see what the deal was and just kind of, you know, like, satisfy the itch that was in my brain. Because I'm like, I don't think Kendrick Perkins is onto anything at all. But let me just give him the benefit of the doubt. I will go back in time and I will see what the deal was. And I did. And I mean, I've come to the conclusion that Kendrick Perkins is onto absolutely nothing. I went and I looked at every single MVP from 1956. Every single MVP in the National Basketball Association since 1956. And I'm going to just rapid fire them right here, right? We'll start in 1956. You got Bob Pettit, Bob Cousy, Bill Russell, Bob Pettit, Will Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Oscar Robertson, Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain, 3 times. Wesley Unseld, Willis Reed, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar 2 years in a row. David Cohens, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bob McAdoo, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar 2 years in a row. Bill Walton, Moses Malone, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Julius Erving, Moses Malone 2 years in a row. Larry Bird, first white guy in, 20 years? 3 years in a row. Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, 2 years in a row. Michael Jordan, 2 years in a row. Charles Barkley, Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, Michael Jordan, Karl Malone, Shaquille O'Neal, Allen Iverson, Tim Duncan 2 years in a row, Kevin Garnett, Steve Nash 2 years in a row. Once again, we've gone like 20 years, and now we finally have another white MVP. Steve Nash 2 years in a row, Dirk Nowitzki, Kobe Bryant, God rest his soul, LeBron James 2 years in a row, Derrick Rose, LeBron James 2 years in a row, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry 2 years in a row, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Giannis Antetokounmpo 2 years in a row, and now Jokic 2 years in a row, probably going to be 3. Once again, we've gone almost 20 years without having a white MVP until Jokic. And of those MVPs that I named, right, because there were a lot of repeats, there were about 30 black MVPs in comparison to only 8 white MVPs. So to give Kendrick the benefit of the doubt, just to a tiny degree, I understand what he's saying, right? That of Steve Nash, Dirk, and Jokic, they were not top 10 in scoring. So what the heck? But once again, JJ Redick went in on him about how efficient they were in other areas of the ball while still scoring, right? It's not like they're not having any points. They're still scoring. They're just efficient in the game as a whole on the best team in the league. So, I mean, that matters, right? But once again, Kendrick is just a scoring guy, but Kendrick is also a race baiter. And that's the problem with all of this race crap, right? Is that you can't even be happy for this man that he's winning MVP. Instead, you got to chalk it up to the fact that he's white. Stephen A. Smith, even though he was quiet in this clip, he's no better in past situations. The Brooklyn Nets, a few years ago, they hired Steve Nash because Steve Nash is retired. They hired him as a head coach. And Stephen A. Smith, all up in arms. Steve Nash is a fantastic player and knows the game of basketball like the back of his hand. And since he was a player, you can build rapport with the players a lot better, right? He's played with some of these guys. Guess what Stephen A. Smith chalks it up to, right? White privilege, that Steve Nash got this job and other black coaches didn't. You don't know if these black coaches wanted the job, but then when a black coach does get the job, because a black coach is now the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets, and not Steve Nash anymore because he's gone from the team. Crickets. I don't hear this big celebratory monologue on First Take or any of these other shows about how fantastic this is. No, it's just we just want to get pissed off when a white person gets something or has something favorable happen to them. You could try to make the case that, oh my goodness, since 1990, that there's been 3 MVPs who haven't been top 10 in scoring, but this just shows you how unsatisfied people are. You can't introduce the race issue into anything in which it's not necessary because people, they like try to go to the extreme with it. Is that seriously what you're up in arms about? When since 1956, the vast majority of NBA MVPs have been black. And when there have been white MVPs, it's been like a 20-year gap. So there will be a white MVP, and then they'll go about like 20 years before another one wins the award. So like, for instance, Larry Bird. Larry Bird won MVP in 1984, 85, and 86. The next white MVP didn't come around until Steve Nash in 2005. And once again, after Dirk wins in 2007, you go until 2021. Or whatever, until Jokic wins. So this is race baiting at its finest because you are reaching to such extremes to try to insinuate that people who either vote on the MVPs are racist and or favor white people over black people. As if there's not a history of 70 years of MVPs being predominantly black especially in the time that it was in. People claim that America is so racist, it's the most racist country. I'm not saying this country's perfect, but what I'm also saying is that the vast majority of people have never stepped outside. They've never experienced a country that is worse off or that has far more problems than we do. But in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, in a time where race-related issues were like blatant, right? Like I'll give it that, right? Because it was true, right? Like racism was public and it was open and it was tolerated. There was still a flurry of black MVPs. So this, like I said, this is absolutely ridiculous, right? But I mean, it's not surprising because just look at the state of ESPN right now.
You are white. I am black.
White supremacy, slave trade.
Because you're white.
Racial discrimination, African Americans, black women.
White privilege. White privilege. White privilege. White people should feel a certain amount of guilt.
Over the past few years, this has been the culmination of ESPN. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not surprised. This is ridiculous. It's disrespectful to Jokić because of how well he's playing. It's disrespectful to anybody who votes on the MVP, especially because of how many black MVPs there have been. It just shows that, like, people can't be grateful, right? I mean, like, because Joel Embiid doesn't win an MVP, which if he did, there would be nothing wrong with that. That's how tight it is. But just because Jokić wins MVP over him, like, it's now, you're insinuating that the process is racist or the people who vote on it are racist or they favor white people. Get out of here, bro. Sports is, like, weird now. Like, it's so, you like, go to it to escape all this, and then you get here and it's right in your face, right? Just everywhere. Racism. Oh my gosh, everywhere. You can't, like I said, you have to really, really look at the show to make sure it's not a news outlet. Because as of now, at least to me, they're all one and the same.